My parents gave my sister a $300,000 apartment for free, then told me to pay for it or prove I don't love my family. This past Christmas was supposed to be the usual weird blend of comfort and quiet resentment, but it turned out to be something else entirely, something that still makes my stomach turn just thinking about it. My name's Rachel, I'm 34 years old, and I've always thought I understood my place in my family, even if it wasn't exactly the one I wanted. But this Christmas shattered any lingering illusions I might have had. I live alone in a condo I rent in Cedar Hill, just outside of Chicago. I've worked in strategic marketing for over a decade now, and I've been doing okay for myself. Not wealthy by any stretch, but I've got a decent salary, no major debt, and I've been carefully saving for years to finally buy a place of my own. I don't take vacations often, and I definitely don't splurge, but I figured that someday soon, I'd be standing in a kitchen I owned and calling it mine. My parents, Joyce and Gerald, still live in the same mid-century house I grew up in. They're 59 and 63, retired early, and spend most of their time at the golf club or talking about their Sunday social circle like it's a full-time job. Then there's my younger sister, Sienna. She's 28, freshly engaged to a guy named Trent who talks like a motivational speaker and acts like he's already part of the family business. We've never been especially close, and it's not because of any one thing. It's just that Sienna has always had everything come easy, and I've always been expected to be okay with that. Growing up, the favoritism wasn't subtle. When I wanted to join a summer writing camp back in high school, Mom said the money just wasn't there. But a few years later, when Sienna decided she wanted to study interior design abroad, they magically found the funds like it was pocket change. I remember busting my ass to land a full scholarship to college, while Sienna got a brand new car to drive to the private university they paid for in full. I never said anything back then because I figured maybe that was just how families worked. You support the one who needs it most, right? So, I drove to their house on Christmas Eve, mentally prepared for another night of watching everyone fawn over Sienna like she was the second coming of royalty. The usual people were there: Uncle Bruce with his loud voice, Aunt Darlene who smells like peppermint schnapps, my cousin Ellie showing off her latest nail design, and Grandma Nora asking the same 5 questions she always does. The house looked like it was copy-pasted from every other year: same candles, same garland, same tension behind the smiles. As soon as I walked in, Mom hugged me and asked how work was going, but before I could get more than 2 words out, she was already glancing behind me, clearly looking to see if Sienna had arrived yet. That was pretty much the theme of the night. I helped set the table, made small talk with people I barely see anymore, and tried to blend in with the background like a lamp. When Sienna finally arrived with Trent, the whole energy shifted. Mom and Dad started acting like the Pope had just walked through the front door. They were whispering, giggling, and giving each other those little glances that make you feel like you missed a memo. Sienna was glowing, like she knew something the rest of us didn't, and Trent looked like he couldn't wait to be the center of attention. Dinner started a little after 7, and I'll admit it was beautiful. The table was set with Mom's special china, the roast looked like something from a cooking magazine, and even Grandma Nora seemed genuinely happy for once. I had just started eating when Mom stood up, clinking her fork against her glass like it was a wedding toast. Everything went quiet, and I knew something big was coming, but I had no idea how big. "We've been planning this surprise for months," she said, barely able to hold back tears. "And tonight, we're finally ready to share it." Dad stood next to her, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "We bought a brand new apartment for Sienna," he said, holding up a shiny brochure. 2 bedrooms. Top floor. Lakecrest Village. The room erupted. People were clapping, cheering, and gasping like someone had just announced a royal engagement. Sienna squealed and leapt to her feet, but the way she acted made it obvious. She already knew. She wasn't surprised. She was just performing. "Yes, honey, it's all yours," Mom cried, hugging her. "We wanted you to start your new life off right." While everyone else passed around the pictures and asked about the floor plan, I just sat there, frozen, my fork still halfway to my mouth. They bought her an apartment. A whole damn apartment. I'd been saving for nearly a decade, carefully counting every dollar, trying to build something for myself, and they just gifted her the dream I'd been chasing for years. Dad went on and on about how it had a view of the river and was only 15 minutes from the gym, as if that were some kind of selling point for a property. Trent started talking about where the TV would go, and Sienna mentioned something about throwing a huge housewarming party. I smiled, nodded, and forced out a congratulations. But inside, I felt like I'd swallowed glass. After dinner, while the rest of the family spread out across the living room and fawned over Sienna's plans for her new place. I stayed behind to help clear the dishes. I figured I could at least get a moment to breathe without someone talking about backsplash tiles or the view from the second balcony. But then Mom came into the kitchen and asked me to help her with a little something in the pantry. I followed her, assuming she needed help grabbing dessert trays or something. But when I walked in, Dad was already there. He had a manila folder in his hands and this weird, serious look on his face. "Rachel, we want to give you these," Mom said, gesturing toward the folder. I opened it, confused, and saw mortgage documents, loan terms, payment schedules, the whole works. I flipped through the first few pages, not understanding why any of this had anything to do with me. "These are the documents for Sienna's apartment," Dad said. "We made the down payment, but we need you to take over the mortgage going forward." I laughed at first. I actually laughed. I thought they were joking, but they weren't laughing. They just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to nod and agree like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You make great money," Mom added, smiling like she was offering me a slice of pie. "And you've been saving for years. This is how you can show Sienna you care." I stared at them, stunned. Not only had they bought her an apartment, but they expected me to pay for it too? "Absolutely not," I said. Their smiles faded. Dad's face darkened, and Mom looked genuinely shocked that I wasn't playing along. "You don't need your own place," Dad snapped. "You're still single at 34. No husband. No kids. You don't need the space." I didn't say anything. I just walked past them, grabbed my coat, and left. The moment I stepped outside into the cold night air, I felt like I'd escaped something I hadn't even fully understood until now. My fingers were shaking as I unlocked my car, and by the time I got inside and closed the door, I could already feel the pressure in my chest building like a slow boil. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no phone, just the sound of my tires rolling through snowy streets and the echo of my father's voice saying I didn't need a place of my own because I was still single. That sentence played over and over in my head, like a curse I couldn't shake, as if the absence of a husband somehow meant I didn't deserve security or independence, as if all the work I had done to build a life for myself meant nothing unless I had someone else to do it for. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the edge of my couch without even taking off my coat. I didn't cry at first. I just stared at the blank television screen, clutching the stem of the wine glass like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. Then it hit me. Not just the insult or the unfairness, but the weight of all the years I'd kept quiet, played along, told myself it wasn't a big deal. I spent that entire night alone, sipping wine and trying to untangle the mess in my head. When I finally fell asleep sometime after 2 in the morning, I still hadn't figured out what the hell I was going to do next. The next morning was Christmas Day, and I was fully expecting a round of apology texts or at least some awkward attempt to smooth things over. Maybe even a message from Sienna saying she'd talk to our parents or try to reason with them. Instead, my phone rang just after 10, and it was my mother. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. I shouldn't have picked up, but I did. "Rachel," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "You made a scene last night and embarrassed the entire family. We had to lie and tell everyone you got sick." I blinked, stunned at how quickly she'd shifted from giving me mortgage papers to scolding me like I was 5 years old. "I didn't make a scene," I said. "I left." "You walked out in the middle of a celebration," she snapped. "Do you know how that made us look?" I didn't even respond. I just waited for her to get to the point, and sure enough, she did. "I'm coming by tomorrow," she said. "You need to sign the documents. It's already been set up with the bank." I took a deep breath and said what I should have said the night before, only this time, slower and louder. "I'm not paying for Sienna's apartment. Not now. Not ever." My mother's voice tightened. "You make enough. You don't have a mortgage. You're not married. You have no one depending on you." "That's right," I said, my voice shaking. "Which is exactly why I'm not going to let you decide what I should do with the life I built." She started to argue, but I hung up. 10 seconds later, she called again. Then again. When I didn't answer, the text started rolling in. First her, then Dad, each message more guilt-soaked than the last. They talked about family, about obligations, about how I was letting everyone down. My father even sent one saying, "This is what happens when people forget where they came from." I turned off my phone and threw it onto the other end of the couch like it was radioactive. That silence lasted less than a day. Late the next afternoon, I got a call from Sienna. Against my better judgment, I answered, hoping for something resembling sanity. Rachel, I can't believe how cruel you're being, she said without even saying hello. You know how important this apartment is to me. I'm not paying for your mortgage, Sienna, I said, cutting her off. She ignored it completely. You can afford it. You don't have kids. You don't even have a dog. What do you need all that money for? It was like listening to my parents through a younger voice. I've worked for 10 years to save for my own home, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You've had everything handed to you your whole life. Now you're expecting me to just give up my future to cover your fantasy of playing house with Trent. She didn't even hesitate. If you really loved me, you'd do it, she said. That's what sisters do. It was like the air left the room. That one sentence, calculated and delivered like it was scripture, made something snap inside me. I didn't say another word. I just hung up the phone and blocked her number. Then I blocked both of my parents. For the first time in my life, I shut the door completely. No explanations. No compromises. Just silence. The next few weeks were peaceful in the way a winter storm can be peaceful once it's over. My phone stopped lighting up with guilt. My apartment felt like a sanctuary. I worked, came home, watched movies, and slowly let the tension melt away. For the first time in what felt like years, I started looking at listings again, actually dreaming about countertops and floor plans without someone else's shadow looming over it. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had given up. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning at the end of January, I opened my mailbox and found a thick envelope with a gold embossed logo on the top left corner. Dalton and Meyer LLP. I opened it in the hallway, and by the time I'd finished reading the first two sentences, my hands were trembling so badly I had to sit down on the stairs. My parents were suing me for $275,000. Not for damages, not for slander, but for reimbursement of long-term parental support services rendered. That was the phrase they used. Services rendered. As if raising me had been some business transaction they now wanted to collect on. I read the letter 3 times, thinking maybe I had misunderstood something. But no, it was all there, in black and white. They wanted money for food, clothing, education, and emotional support. They claimed that because I refused to support the family's evolving financial needs, I had breached some unspoken agreement of generational loyalty. I didn't cry. I didn't call them. Instead, I called Derek, my friend from college who had gone to law school while the rest of us were still floundering with temp jobs and internships. We hadn't talked in a while, but I knew if anyone could tell me what to do, it would be him. Hey, I said when he answered. This is going to sound insane, but I just got sued by my parents. He didn't laugh. He didn't even hesitate. Tell me everything, he said. Start from the beginning. I told him about the apartment, the Christmas dinner, the mortgage papers, the guilt trip, the endless messages, and finally, the lawsuit. He let out a long sigh when I was done. Rachel, this is absurd. Legally, it's garbage. Parents are obligated to support their kids until they're adults. That's the law. You can't invoice someone for raising them. I felt a little better hearing him say it, but I still couldn't shake the sick feeling in my stomach. So, what do I do? I asked. He didn't even pause. We fight it, he said. We go to court, and we burn this nonsense to the ground. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected, but somehow not fast enough. Every night leading up to it, I kept waking up in the dark, wondering if I had missed something, some fine print, some legal loophole that might somehow let them win. But each time, Derek reassured me that we had nothing to fear. Still, it didn't feel real until I stepped into the courthouse and saw them sitting there, my parents, dressed like they were attending a fundraiser, flanked by some shark-looking attorney in a 3-piece suit. Sienna was there too, seated in the gallery behind them, wearing oversized sunglasses like she was dodging paparazzi. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look embarrassed. She looked bored, as if the whole thing had nothing to do with her anymore. Maybe it didn't, in her mind. I sat beside Derek at our table and tried to steady my breathing, but my hands were ice cold, and the air felt too thin, like the room had been drained of oxygen. I wasn't afraid of losing the case. We had the law on our side, but I couldn't stop thinking about how far this had gone. That the same 2 people who once carried me home from school with a scraped knee were now suing me for hundreds of thousands of dollars because I refused to bankroll their favorite daughter's real estate fantasy. The bailiff called the room to order, and Judge Margot Fields entered, taking her place at the bench. She looked sharp, calm, and not at all interested in nonsense, which gave me some hope. This is the matter of Gerald and Joyce versus Rachel, the clerk announced, his voice echoing slightly in the wood-paneled courtroom. Derek stood and gave the judge a brief, respectful nod. Your Honor, we respectfully move to dismiss this case in full. The opposing lawyer jumped up almost immediately. Your Honor, if I may, we intend to demonstrate that the defendant, though legally an adult, has benefited disproportionately from the plaintiff's long-term investment in her upbringing and is now refusing to assist the family in a time of need. Judge Fields raised an eyebrow so high I thought it might launch right off her face. Counselor, are you suggesting that the plaintiffs are entitled to retroactive compensation for raising their child? The lawyer cleared his throat, fumbling slightly. We believe there is precedent for restitution when adult children fail to provide reasonable support in light of family sacrifice. The judge looked unimpressed. And do the plaintiffs have any legal agreement or documentation in which the defendant agreed to repay the cost of being parented? He shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward my parents. Not formally, no. Then we'll move forward, but this better be good, she said, flipping through her case file. When it was their turn to speak, my father stood and launched into what sounded like a memorized monologue. He spoke of sacrifice, of long nights working to pay for my school clothes, of the food they put on the table, and of how hurt they were that I hadn't stepped up when they asked for help. The moment he mentioned her refusal to financially support her younger sister's future, the judge held up a hand. Let me clarify something. Was the mortgage in question in the defendant's name? No, Dad admitted, but it was always the plan. And did she ever sign anything agreeing to take on this responsibility? No, but then it wasn't her debt. The judge cut in. My mother tried to take over, her voice trembling as she described how Sienna had always been more fragile, more dependent, and how I had always been the strong one. She said I had the money, the stability, and the independence, so what harm would it do to help just this once? Judge Fields looked at them both for a long time, then turned toward Derek. Counselor, your motion? Derek stood, calm as ever. Your Honor, under state law, parents are legally obligated to care for their children until they reach adulthood. That is not a negotiable arrangement. It is a responsibility. The claim that the defendant owes repayment for her childhood is not only baseless, it's offensive. He handed over a packet of documents. These show that Rachel has been financially independent since the day she graduated high school. She paid for her own college tuition through a merit scholarship. She's paid rent, bills, taxes, everything, without $1 from her parents. Meanwhile, her younger sister, an adult, has received full financial support, including an apartment down payment. The judge flipped through the packet, her eyes scanning quickly. Then Derek added the final nail. We also have this voicemail, he said, accidentally left by the plaintiff, in which he refers to Rachel as the one who's too stubborn to guilt, and says, quote, she'll come around once she sees Sienna struggling. The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Fields removed her glasses and looked at my parents. Her expression was as unreadable as stone. Mr. and Mrs. Gerald, she said slowly, you've brought a frivolous lawsuit against your daughter for fulfilling your legal responsibilities as parents. There is no legal ground here, not even close. And worse, your own words suggest this case was never about justice. It was about manipulation. My mother opened her mouth, then shut it again. My father stared straight ahead, his hands clenched in fists. This case is dismissed with prejudice, the judge concluded. The plaintiffs will cover all court costs and attorney fees. We are adjourned. The gavel came down like thunder. And just like that, it was over. I didn't look back at them. I didn't wait for Sienna to say something smug or broken. I just stood, thanked Derek under my breath, and walked straight out of that courtroom like the weight of 10 years had been lifted off my shoulders. But relief isn't the same thing as healing. Because even though we won, the price of what they tried to do didn't vanish. Not when I got home. Not when I sat on my couch, surrounded by silence, realizing that my family, my actual parents, had tried to ruin me over money that wasn't even meant for them. I thought it might take a while for the fallout to start, but I underestimated how fast gossip spreads in a small community. Within 48 hours, I had voicemails from Aunt Darlene, from Cousin Ellie, from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to know what the hell happened. Some were supportive, some were just nosy, but the tone of every single message was the same, complete disbelief. Even Grandma Nora called, which she rarely does. When I picked up, her voice was clear but shaky. Rachel, she said, I raised 5 kids on a single income. I never thought once about billing them for it. I wanted to laugh, but I just closed my eyes and thanked her. She sighed. They've lost the plot, honey. I don't know what happened to them. Neither did I. I thought after the case was dismissed, things would settle into a quiet kind of resentment. I figured my parents would keep their distance out of embarrassment, and that Sienna would go on pretending she was some kind of victim of my coldness. But what happened next was something I hadn't fully anticipated. Their social world collapsed. Almost overnight. The same people who once hosted wine tastings with them or planned summer cruises stopped returning their calls. My mother, who used to run the women's brunch group at their church, was suddenly left off the invitation list. My dad, who once bragged about chairing the local outreach committee, was quietly asked to step down. Apparently, when the words "sued their daughter for being raised" made it into the community grapevine, their status crumbled like a stale cracker. I didn't gloat. Not out loud, anyway. But I can't pretend I didn't feel some grim satisfaction when I got a text from my cousin Ellie that said, "Your parents just got booted from the church potluck email thread." That's gotta hurt. Then came the fallout closer to home. Trent dumped Sienna. From what I heard, he had no idea that the apartment was supposed to be financed through me. He thought it was a fully funded gift from her parents. So when the lawsuit made headlines in our local paper's digital blotter, and yes, it did, he confronted her about it. Apparently, she tried to spin it like I had offered and then changed my mind. But Trent isn't dumb, and he certainly isn't sentimental. Once he realized there was no money, no apartment, and no sugar sister footing the bill, he bailed. Sienna moved back in with our parents 3 weeks later. I found that out from Aunt Darlene, who called me while folding laundry and gave me a full recap as if it were an episode of a reality show. Apparently, the apartment is up for sale, she said. They couldn't keep up with the payments. The realtor said they defaulted on the second month's balance. I couldn't even respond for a moment. The absurdity was too much. So not only had they tried to trap me into paying for the place, but they hadn't even secured the financing to keep it afloat without me. It had all been a gamble, one big, desperate, delusional gamble. And they lost. For a while after that, I didn't hear much. No more calls. No more letters. No messages from Sienna trying to guilt me into forgiving and forgetting. Just silence. And for once, silence felt like a gift. I went back to my regular routine: work, cooking simple meals, going on long walks to clear my head. I resumed apartment hunting, this time with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I even went to see a place that had everything I'd ever imagined: big windows, a little balcony, and hardwood floors that didn't creak when you walked. 6 weeks after the court date, I made an offer, and they accepted. I stood in that empty apartment on the day I closed, looking at the sun casting long streaks across the walls, and for the first time in what felt like my entire adult life, I didn't feel like I owed anything to anyone. It was mine. All of it. No cosigners. No drama. No hidden expectations wrapped in a bow. I moved in 2 weeks later with nothing but a mattress, a folding chair, and a coffee maker. And I was happy. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some part of me, maybe curiosity, maybe caution, picked up anyway. It was my mother. Her voice was cautious, like someone walking on glass barefoot. "Rachel, I know this is unexpected, but I'd like to meet. Just to talk." I sat on my couch, staring at the white wall in front of me. "What exactly do you want to talk about?" I asked, my voice completely flat. "I think we all made mistakes. Things got out of hand. I want to fix this." I almost laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that came with joy. It was the kind that happens when the absurdity is so high it nearly tips into horror. "You sued me for being your child," I said. "There's no fixing that." She was quiet for a few seconds. "It was never supposed to go that far. We were hurt. We weren't thinking clearly." "You filed legal paperwork," I said. "You hired a lawyer." "That's not thinking clearly. That's planning." "I just miss you," she said, her voice cracking. "You're still our daughter." "And Sienna?" I asked. "How's her new apartment?" There was silence again. "She's staying with us for now." Of course she was. "I just want my family back," my mother said finally. I shook my head, not that she could see it. "You don't want your family back. You want the version of me that says yes no matter what. And that version doesn't exist anymore." "I understand," she said, barely a whisper. But I knew she didn't. And when I ended the call, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. Later that night, I stood by the window in my new living room, sipping tea and watching the city lights blink against the sky. I thought about all the things I had been expected to give, my time, my savings, my silence, and how none of it had ever been framed as a request. Just a duty. 3 months after I moved into my new apartment, life had finally settled into something close to peace. I wasn't waiting for the next blow anymore. I wasn't checking my phone for hostile messages or worrying about whether my family would try some new legal stunt. For the first time in a long time, I had my own space and could breathe without flinching. I was even starting to sleep through the night again, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing until it came back. I stopped talking about it too. When friends asked how things were with my parents, I just shrugged and changed the subject. People meant well, but most of them couldn't wrap their heads around it. It's hard to explain what it feels like when your family turns into strangers in tailored clothing with courtroom documents and twisted definitions of loyalty. It doesn't make sense until it happens to you. Then, right when I thought everything had settled for good, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Sienna. I stared at it for a while, half expecting it to be a mistake, maybe some glitch or an old contact that hadn't updated. But it was real. A simple message. Just 3 words. Can we talk? I didn't answer right away. I didn't even know if I wanted to. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, and eventually, I replied with a time and place, neutral ground, somewhere public. We met at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, one that didn't carry memories or history. She arrived wearing a coat too big for her, hair pulled back, no makeup. For the first time I could remember, she didn't look like someone playing a part. She just looked tired. She didn't sit down right away. She stood beside the table, fidgeting with the strap on her bag before finally saying, "I need to tell you something, and I want to do it right." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She sat across from me and pulled out a manila envelope. My stomach dropped the second I saw it. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, pushing it toward me. "I found this in Mom's office 2 weeks ago. I thought you should see it." I opened the envelope slowly, not sure what I was about to find. Inside were 5 pages of legal documentation, an early draft of a private contract between my parents and the mortgage company. But what stopped me cold was the section labeled Guarantor Agreement. There, typed neatly in black ink, was my full name. Rachel, listed as the co-signer for the apartment, dated a full week before Christmas Eve. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Then it hit me like a fist to the chest. They were going to sign it as if I had agreed, I said, barely able to get the words out. Sienna nodded, her eyes shining with something that looked a lot like shame. "They told me you had offered to help," she said softly. "That you'd said yes, and that the paperwork was just a formality. I didn't know any of this until I found that draft and saw your name." I sat back in the chair, completely numb. My parents hadn't just tried to guilt me. They hadn't just sued me. They were ready to forge my financial commitment without ever telling me. They were going to lock me into decades of debt without consent, then play dumb when I found out. "That's fraud," I said, my voice flat and low. Sienna nodded again. "I know. That's why I came." She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. I scanned everything. I made copies. "Do what you need to do." For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the envelope, at the documents that could have destroyed my life if things had gone even slightly differently. I looked up at her. "Why now?" She sighed, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. "Because I'm tired. Because I lost everything and started asking myself why. Because I finally realized that maybe the version of our family I believed in never really existed." I didn't know what to say to that. There was no apology in her voice, but there was honesty, and for once, it felt like enough. I left the coffee shop with the flash drive in my coat pocket, the envelope clutched under one arm, and 1,000 thoughts swirling in my head. I went home and sent the entire folder to Derek with a note that just said, "Read this now." He called 20 minutes later. "This is bad," he said. "Really bad for them. Can I press charges?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Forgery, fraud, attempted identity theft. But I need to ask, do you want to?" I didn't answer right away. I walked around my apartment in circles, looking at the walls, the quiet, the proof of everything I'd worked so hard for. I thought about the lawsuit, about Christmas Eve, about every time I had been dismissed, minimized, used. And I thought about what it would mean to be the one who struck the final blow. "No," I said finally, "but I want you to send it to the Financial Crimes Unit anonymously. Let them take it from there." He didn't argue. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from the state office. It didn't name me. It didn't require me to testify. but it confirmed that a formal investigation into mortgage fraud had been opened against two individuals in Cedar Hill. I never heard what came of it, and I didn't need to. What mattered was that the truth was out there. Not because I screamed it from the rooftops, but because they buried themselves with their own lies. And when the dust settled, I still had my home, my career, my peace. They had each other, and nothing else. I never spoke to them again. Not when Sienna messaged me to say she was moving out. Not when I heard from a friend of a friend that my parents tried to refinance their house and were denied. Not even when a postcard showed up in my mailbox a year later with no return address and just one sentence written across it. We were wrong.